Dimensions of the Daf with Rabbi Mordecai Becher on JBS is made possible in part by the B.L. Manger Foundation in memory of Ben Manger.
Hi, Mordecai Becher here with Dimensions of the Daf of the Jewish Broadcasting Service, in which we discuss a different topic based on the Talmud primarily and other Jewish sources. And please tune in to us, and you can get us online as well. And also a shout out to people who I met recently in Philadelphia, in NYC, in Upper West Side of Manhattan, and one other exotic location in New Jersey, which I forgot, Cherry Hill. People who've seen me on JBS, it's always great to actually see my audience as opposed to staring at a camera or monitor or anything like that. It's good to see there's actual humans out there who are watching. Anyway, today's episode is Honor Your Father and Mother, the obligation of honoring parents. I know this sounds very archaic, but it is fascinating to note that in the Ten Commandments, number 5 is honor your parents, honor your father and mother. Now, the Ten Commandments, by the way, they're not more important than other commandments, but if something is in the Ten Commandments, what that means is it encompasses a lot of the Torah, a lot of Judaism. Why? The Ten Commandments actually in Hebrew are not called 10 commandments, they're called 10 statements, Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements. And they are a type of like the title page of a book, table of contents. You want to know what the Torah is about? It's these 10 topics. I am God, don't steal, sacred relationships, don't tell a lie, etc., etc. In other words, these are ideas, concepts that encompass the entire Torah. So if number 5 is, and it's not if, it is number 5, I do know the 10 commandments, right? Number 5 is honor your father and mother. What that means is that commandment encompasses a huge amount of Judaism, the whole idea of tradition, the idea of authority, the idea of family unit, many, many concepts behind it, which we'll hopefully discuss some of them. So there are two sources, two places where the Ten Commandments appear in the Torah, and Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5. And what it says is, Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Honor your father and your mother. Then also in Leviticus, we have another statement, slightly different, which says every person shall fear his mother and father. Okay, which is different. Honor your father and mother is in the Ten Commandments. In Leviticus, Vayikra, it's you shall fear your mother and father. There are two other commandments which are relevant here. One is in Devarim 27, Deuteronomy 27, which says you're not allowed to curse, or cursed is he who dishonors his father and his mother. And another one that is an explicit prohibition against hitting a parent. So that's a serious, serious prohibition. We're not going to discuss that so much. Hopefully it's not going to come up too much. But honor your father and mother is very, very important. And there's a number of Talmudic statements. There's a lot of Talmudic statements about this obligation of honoring parents. Before I even get to those statements, just a word about the Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Now, which is on the slide. But you see, when you say in Hebrew, honor your father and mother, you could say it without the word et, aleph taf, or with the word et, and there's no real translation of that word. So if I would say in Hebrew, kabed avicha ve'imecha, honor your father and mother, that would translate and read exactly the same as kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and mother. The word et doesn't seem to have any meaning whatsoever. So the Talmud understands that the word et, aleph taf, is always an inclusive term. That is to say, it includes more than what is stated explicitly. Why is that? Why is it an inclusive term? because those of you who are astute and know a little Hebrew will know that Aleph and Taf, Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, and Taf is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which means it's like in English, if we say, do everything here, A to Z, or as you Americans say, A to Z, right? You'd say A to Z. So the word et, Aleph Taf, is like the Torah saying A to Z. So when it says honor your father, but it says et avicha, the A to Z of your father, and it says honor your mother, and it says et imecha, the A to Z of your mother. So what is included here? The Talmud says, for example, if your father or mother remarries, and they're now married to someone else who is not your father or mother, you have to respect the spouse of your father and the spouse of your mother. Because that, by honouring their spouse, you're honouring your parent as well. It's not just, if you honour your parent, but dishonour and disrespect and treat their spouse with contempt, then you are, to some level, to a great level, treating your parent with disrespect and contempt. So it also includes your parent's spouse. In addition, et avicha v'et imecha would include their parents. Not only are you obligated to honour your father, but you're also your grandfather. Not just your mother, but your grandmother. Your grandparents are also, by honouring your parents, or honouring your grandparents, you're honouring your parents as well. It is a vicarious honour of the parents. Included in this also is an older sibling. The older sibling should have a certain level, you should have a certain level of respect for the older sibling. Et avicha ve'et imecha. So the word et means the greatly expanded version of honouring your parents. Now, we now come to what the Talmud says, a few statements from the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, Kiddushin 31a. It says, be very careful in the honour of your parents because their honour is compared to the honour of God. It's a very interesting, strange statement. That sounds almost idolatrous. What do you mean? Your parents' honour is compared to the honour of God? So one idea behind this is, when I honour my parents, I'm honouring my immediate creator. By honouring my immediate creator and not assuming that I just am here, independent, came out of nowhere, but I'm acknowledging those who created me and who sustained me, and in some cases continue to sustain you. So by honouring them, it gives me an understanding of the honour due to God, who not only created me, but created space, time, matter, the universe, etc., etc., etc. So honouring the parent, their honour is compared to God's honour, because honouring them is honouring my origin. And my immediate origins, my parents, my ultimate origin is God himself. And so by honouring my parents, I'm actually going back to the original parent, God, who is the parent of the world. Now, another thing that the Talmud discusses is that, as I mentioned, there's one statement in the Torah which says, honour your parents. There's another statement which says, fear. What is the difference between honour, kavod, and fear, yira? So the Talmud discusses this. Talmud says, in Kiddushin 31b, what's fear, what's honour? Fear means don't stand in his place, don't sit in his seat, don't contradict him, and don't agree with him. We'll explain this. Honour means give them food and drink, dress them, cover them, lead, accompany them, etc. So basically, fear is understood as refraining from something negative. So let's say your parent has a favourite seat they always sit in. So if they're there, don't sit in it. Or if, for example, not to stand in the place where they always stand in a synagogue, for example, that would be not fearing a parent, contradicting a parent. Now, you should not contradict them. I don't know, your father says the speed of light is 186,540 miles per second. You say, excuse me, it's actually 186,550 miles per second. And then you'll have an argument about the Michelson-Morley experiment and the fact that there are, whatever, right? Just don't contradict them, just leave it be. And concur with him. Now, that sounds counterintuitive. If you agree with your parent, isn't that honouring them? The answer is no, because they don't need your agreement. In other words, it's a certain level of disrespect to say, oh yeah, dad's right or mum's right. It's not for you to say that. So the Talmud says that fear is don't do something which is, it's refraining from something. Or another example would be calling them by their first name. You should call them by a title. Father, mother, dad, mum, Abba Mori in classic Talmudic sources. You're supposed to refer to your father as Abba Mori, my father, my master, which is pretty heavy. Although I should point out that contemporary or later authorities say that whatever the parents are comfortable with is what you should do. So, when I walk into the room and if my kids would stand up and say, Shalom Alecha Abba Mori, peace unto you, my father, my master, it would weird me out. They know that it's sufficient for them to say, hi, Dad, etc. But whatever the contemporary expression of respect is, that should be important. Now, what is honor? Honor, a more positive sign. Honor is, for instance, the Talmud says, give them food and drink. Would you like a beer? Would you like another tequila? Whatever, to bring them food and drink, to dress them, to cover them, to help them. Can I help you on with your cardigan, etc. Can I give you a ride? In other words, positive expressions. So kavod generally refers to positive actions, expressions of honor, and fear refers to refraining from negative ideas, negative activities. And it's interesting, the Gemara actually tells us that the honor of parents is one of the most difficult commandments to fulfill in the entire Torah. It's difficult because human interaction, we live with them, right? Kids think they know everything. It was Mark Twain, I think it was, who famously said that when he was 18, he thought his father was a complete idiot. He turned 21, he was amazed how much his father had learnt in 3 years. As you mature, you begin to respect more the wisdom of elders. The Talmud actually says, if you want advice, if you want logic, you want logical analysis, go to someone young. But if you want advice, go to someone older. There's a respect for age, the respect for old age, and I keep mentioning this more and more as my beard goes whiter and whiter. But there is an idea to respect old age, to respect the experience of a person. So the child has to respect that. But it's really difficult to do. A, because of ego, and B, because of interactions, and sometimes parents not necessarily always the most competent parents, and parents make mistakes, not me obviously, but other parents do make mistakes, and so it's difficult, and it's very difficult, and the honor due to a parent is so great because you owe them so much. They gave you life, they sustained you, they nurtured you, they paid your tuition, right? Just for that alone, you owe them everything. But all of this is really a tremendous obligation. The Talmud, for example, relates a story, also in the same place, Kiddushin, the story of a Gentile called Dama ben Natina, who was a very wealthy man, and he was sitting amongst the notables of Rome, wearing a toga that was woven with gold thread, and he was sitting at a meal amongst some Roman dignitaries. His mother, who was insane, I mean, literally, she came into the meal, she sees him, she tears his clothing, slaps him and spits in his face and walks out. He does not utter a word of rebuke to her. He does not react to it at all. He just adjusts his toga and continues the meal. The Talmud says that as a classic example of the honor due. Rabbi Tarfon, a rabbi in the Talmud, he used to lie, his mother had difficulty with her legs, I guess, so he used to lie on the floor next to his mother's bed so she could step on him to get to her bed. When she needed to get out of bed, he'd lie down so she could step on him to get out of bed. He actually went to the yeshiva, to the synagogue, or to the house of study, and he mentioned this casually to someone who said, this is what I do for my mother. My back's hurting a bit. She stepped on my back a little harder than usual. And one of the other rabbis said to him, you haven't even reached half of the respect due to your mother. That's absolutely incredible. And not only that, but we'll go a little further. Maimonides says that even if the person's parent is not a good person, even if a person's parent has committed some pretty serious sins, a person's still obligated to honor the parent. And as I mentioned, the child, according to the Code of Jewish law, should stand up when a parent comes into the room and actually say, peace unto you, my master, my father, my mother, But however, I did point out earlier that the Aruch HaShulchan, a rabbi from the early 20th century, writes that in addressing your parents, you should use expressions of respect that are correct in one society rather than the expressions mentioned in the classical sources, because You want to be respectful, not weird. And also, the Code of Jewish Law cautions parents that they should not lay the yoke or the burden of respect too heavily upon their children. Meaning, if the parent is too strict with the children in terms of demands of respect, then it will almost inevitably lead to rebellion. It will probably lead to disrespect. So the parent should be aware of this and should not be placing too much burden on the children in terms of respect. We also are told, as I mentioned, that the younger siblings should respect the older siblings. That is certainly as a gesture of respect to the parents. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, and that's important to mention. Let's say the parent tells you to do something wrong. Parent says, I want you to go out and, I don't know, extreme case, steal that money, all right, steal that car. Obviously, you're not allowed to do that. If the parent says, could you please mow the lawn? And I say, sure, Dad, right? And he says, but I want you to do it Saturday morning. So in those cases, we are told, the Talmud tells us, based on a verse in Vayikra that I mentioned before, it says, a person shall fear his mother and father and keep my Shabbat. In other words, it's like placing a little caveat. Fear your parents, yes, but keep my Shabbat. In other words, if the parent tells you to do something against the law, you're not supposed to listen to them. This doesn't mean, however, that you're allowed to disrespect them. You still have to honor them. So, for example, the parent tells you to do something wrong, you say, respectfully, I cannot do that, but I'm sorry, but you want me to mow the lawn, I'll do it first thing Sunday morning, or I'll do it first thing Saturday night, or I'll do it Sunday afternoon. In other words, this doesn't give you a green light to completely ignore the honor of parents. It just says that if their honor contradicts the honor of God in his commandments, whether they be Shabbat, whether it be theft, whatever it is, then the honor of God comes first. And also, by the way, this also means that the ultimate decisions about things which are part of your own spiritual health and growth, like where you study Torah, for example, or whom you marry, while you should certainly listen to your parents' advice, the ultimate decision in areas like that has to be the decision of the child, not of the parents, because obviously whom you marry, where you live, where you study Torah, these are all very much personal, intimate decisions which are very much related to your spiritual growth, your relationship with God, with your own soul, etc. And that's something which really has to be up to the person themselves, even though we would certainly counsel listening to one's parents' counsel. And now, there are a number of reasons that we have such major respect for our parents and such stringency regarding that. One of the reasons is very simply, as I mentioned, it's a recognition of one's origins, the recognition that ultimately, as I have physical parents, I have a spiritual parent, I have God. In the same way as I owe them respect, honor, gratitude because they created me and they nurtured me, clearly how much more so do I owe that respect, honor and gratitude to God who created me and the entire world. But in addition, it's also a moral obligation based on simple gratitude. Gratitude is so important because gratitude is the basis of so much of our moral code. Someone did me a favor, say thank you. I have to do a favor back to them. Gratitude is the basis of much of our obligation towards God, because we're grateful to him for giving us life and for sustaining us. So gratitude to another person is clearly a moral obligation of the Torah. And in terms of one's parents, there is the greatest level of gratitude has to be the child to the parents. So A, it's the recognition of my origin. B, it's the idea of gratitude. C, also, it is part of the system of Judaism requires respect for parents because Torah, Judaism, and our commandments are transmitted primarily, not from books, but they're supposed to be transmitted by parents, by a person, because Judaism is not just about learning a series of facts which you can memorize from a book, but it's about how to live. And to learn how to live in the way that Judaism wants us to live, I need a living example of that. So I need a parent. For example, in almost all systems of education, we have a non-written communication, non-written, for example, I've actually asked people all over the world, literally, this question, which is, do you know how to swim? And, people put their hands up, yes, no, swim. Now, the second question, my follow-up question is anyone here learn how to swim from a book? No one has ever put up their hand that they've learned how to swim from a book. And the reason for that is because, tragically, those who learn how to swim from a book are no longer with us. Because certain skills like swimming, certain skills like how to tie your shoelaces, how to treat your spouse, how to treat your cousin, how to treat another person, a stranger, a worker, etc. You learn those not from books, you learn those from observing and from imitating people who you respect. And so therefore, in Judaism, we have this mitzvah, the obligation of respect for parents, because part of that is, it's the lifestyle that we want to transmit, and how to transmit that lifestyle requires the intergenerational contact and intergenerational respect. And not only that, but a parent, we believe also, previous generations are a living link in the chain back to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, where God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, where the great revelation at Mount Sinai. So we have a chain. If you calculate the amount of generations back, it's something like 120 or so generations. I don't know exactly, but it's about 3,200 years. So that means let's say, I have to imagine there's 120 people standing, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, their great-grandparents, and so on and so forth, all those change of people who saw each other, all were transmitting that Torah from Sinai. So to some degree, the person who is the generation before me, I have to look at as a link a little closer to Mount Sinai. That's very important. When I see myself as connected to Mount Sinai and to the revelation of the Torah and to God's confrontation, or rather, not confrontation is not the right word, but God's revelation of the Torah and of these ethics to an entire people, then the further back you are in that chain, I've got to respect that, because you're a little closer, somewhat closer to that transmission. And so also the idea of the living Torah, the idea of the Torah's transmission necessitates that idea of respect for the previous generation, respect for parents. Is a very beautiful idea which is mentioned by Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik I, who writes that the Jewish people are compared not to the ark. The ark is the wooden box, the container in which the tablets of the law were placed. He says, and that's beautiful. To be the ark, the holy ark, is a fantastic thing. But he says, really, we're not just the holy ark, we are all the parchment upon which the Torah is written, because the history of the Jewish people, that is part of the Torah. What happened to the Jews in Babylon, the Purim story. What happened to the Jews, Hanukkah, created the festival of Hanukkah. What happened to the Jews in Egypt, created the festival of the Passover, and so on and so forth. That means our actions, our decisions, the history, the things that happen to us, the things that we caused to happen, that all becomes part of the fabric of the Torah and of Jewish tradition. That means when I see an older person, when I see an elderly person, when I see a parent, a grandparent, etc., what I should be envisioning is I'm seeing a living parchment, a living Torah scroll. I remember my wife and I went to Russia when it was still communist. Now it was under the Soviet Union. Some people here may have heard of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union, when it was communist, there was a lot of suppression of religion. There was a lot of discrimination against Jews who were Zionists and who were trying to be religious Jews, etc. My wife and I went to the Soviet Union to teach Torah. We spoke in Hebrew. My wife speaks a little Russian. So we taught Torah to people there in Russia. It was clandestine. It was actually illegal for us to do this. So yes, I admit to doing something illegal. But anyway, it was the Soviet Union, so who cares? But anyway, we did this, and I asked one of the, before we went, we were given a list of things to bring with us. A lot of it was food and medication and things like that, and they didn't ask for books. So I asked one of the people in Russia, one of the Jews we met in Moscow, I asked him, why didn't you ask us to bring books, Jewish books? So he said, first of all, customs would have probably taken them away from you. But he says, really, we don't need books. There are a lot of old books in the synagogues here in Moscow and in other places. He said, what we really need are living Torah scrolls. We need human beings with whom we can communicate, ask questions, argue, see how they act, learn by living example. I remember we were there on a Shabbat, and we were at someone's apartment for lunch in Shabbat. Friday night, my wife and I stayed in the Hotel Cosmos, and we ate in our room the delicious canned tuna and stale matzah that we brought with us. But Shabbat lunch, we stayed with the family, went to a family not far from the big television tower in Moscow. It was a long walk, and one of the things that they asked us was, could you please teach us some songs, some Shabbat songs from Jerusalem, from Israel. Teach us songs. Now, that's the type of thing you want to hear. You want to see a human being, how do they conduct the Shabbat meal, because the Sabbath meals are very beautifully done, and we have different parts of the meal and different aspects of the meal, and you need to see that. So the transmission of customs also is important. From a Jewish perspective, Jews are like the parchment upon which the Torah is written. We're not just like the ark in which the Torah is placed, in which the Torah is one thing, the ark is a separate thing. The parchment is one with the Torah, and by the respect for our parents, for the previous generation, we are actually reaching back, making contact with Sinai, reaching back, making contact with our ultimate Father, with God, and we are also expressing gratitude to those who brought us into this world. So it's all of those things combined, and that is why in Judaism it is such an important, major obligation, and a beautiful obligation, which is to respect parents, grandparents, to respect our parents' spouses, the older siblings, etc., because it is all included in that idea of gratitude, the connection back to our origin, which is God, the connection back to Mount Sinai, the transmission of Torah, and the lifestyle of Torah, and the ethics and the morality, and of course the experience of an older person, which is only gained when the person treats them with respect. This is so anyway, that is, although I said that you cannot learn everything from books, some books you can. My book, Gateway to Judaism, available on Amazon and bookstores, and please come and tune in again. This is Mordecai Becher with the Jewish Broadcasting Service, Dimensions of the Daf. Thank you for watching.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.